Essentially, some Republicans have bucked with the party and are signing on to a war powers resolution that would limit Trump's ability to continue military engagement in Venezuela. Now, obviously, the fact that this even needs to be passed is an enormous concession to Trump to begin with, because Congress already legally is the only institution that can declare war on another country. It's just that Congress has consistently, time and time again, waived that right by allowing the president to engage in essentially unlimited acts of, special military operations or whatever, Russia bullshit, without ever impeaching him for doing so. So Congress has essentially ceded that right. Does this remove the ability for police action? The goal would be to prevent Trump from meddling further in Venezuela. I sincerely doubt this is going to go through. Trump already crashed out about it. I mean, he can veto it. Trump goes nuclear on the 5 Republicans who backed the Venezuela War Powers Resolution, saying they should never be elected to office again. Republicans should be ashamed of the senators that just voted with Democrats in attempting to take away our powers to fight and defend the U.S. of A. Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Rand Paul, Josh Hawley, and Todd Young should never be elected to office again. The vote greatly hampers American self-defense and national security, impeding the president's authority as commander-in-chief. In any event, despite their stupidity, the War Powers Act is unconstitutional, totally violating Article 2 of the Constitution, as all presidents and their DOJs have determined before me. He's lying here, but he's not wrong on precedent. For the past 50 years, even since the passing of the War Powers Resolution of 1973, the president has still just done whatever he's wanted. Like, the president has still been able to do literally whatever he wants. So, unfortunately, yeah, this is what happens when you fail to use a power. It's like a muscle. It atrophies. Between this and the fact that the administration seems to genuinely want to take over Greenland, there's a lot of kerfuffle right now over the extent of the power that Trump has, which was beautifully outlined in a New York Times article that came out today, in which Trump explicitly states, the only limitations on his power are from his own morality, nothing else. Trump declared on Wednesday evening that his power as commander-in-chief is constrained only by his own morality, brushing aside international law and other checks on his ability to use military might to strike, invade, or coerce nations around the world. Asked in a wide-ranging interview with the New York Times if there were any limits on his global powers, Mr. Trump said, "Yeah, there is one thing. My own morality, my own mind. It is the only thing that can stop me. I don't need international law," he added. "I'm not looking to hurt people." This is a degree of naked authoritarianism that, if discussed like a decade ago, would be seen as a joke. Any vision of America's future this pessimistic would be dismissed outright, even by reasonable people, not just like centrists or libs or whatever, reasonable people, as essentially impossible. It's inconceivable. And yet, here we are. When pressed further about whether his administration needed to abide by international law, Mr. Trump said, "I do," but he made clear he would be the arbiter when such constraints applied to the United States. "It depends what your definition of international law is," he said. Mr. Trump's assessment of his own freedom to use any instrument of military, economic, or political power to cement American supremacy was the most blunt acknowledgement yet of his worldview. At its core is the concept that national strength, rather than laws, treaties, and conventions, should be the deciding factor as powers collide. He did acknowledge some constraints at home, even as he has pursued a maximalist strategy of punishing institutions he dislikes, exacting retribution against political opponents, and deploying the National Guard to cities over the objections of state and local officials. I've heard about that. He made clear that he uses his reputation for unpredictability and a willingness to resort quickly to military action, often in service of coercing other nations. During his interview with The Times, he took a lengthy call from President Gustavo Petro of Colombia, who was clearly concerned after repeated threats that Mr. Trump was thinking of an attack on the country similar to the one on Venezuela. "Well, we are in danger," Mr. Petro said in an interview with The Times just before the call, "because the threat is real. It was made by Trump." The call between the two leaders, the contents of which were off the record, was an example of coercive diplomacy in action, and it came just hours after Mr. Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio had extracted the U.S. from dozens of international organizations — we'll talk about that in a second — intended to foster multinational cooperation. I mean, we've talked at length about the death of the liberal rules-based world order, but I feel like this degree of unitary power doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth. Like, no other country could meet this standard. I would be surprised if even Vladimir Putin does. Like, he probably is more at the whim of his own oligarchs than Trump is right now. No one even slightly checks Trump. North Korea, perhaps? No, I guarantee you that Kim's behavior is moderated extensively by his generals. I truly, Netanyahu, not even close. Netanyahu answers to a broad range of interests. I really don't think there is any place on earth where so much power is concentrated in one person's brain. I really don't know how the world is going to bounce back from this, to be honest. We are returning to a pre World War One. We're returning to like Ottoman Empire and beforehand standards of international engagement, but now people have nukes. 19th century colonialism with 21st century weapons. Yeah, it is very 19th century. They're actually trying to do great man theory. Well, no, what they're trying to do is might makes right, you know? It's the oldest argument, and in a lot of cases might makes right is actually a pretty stable way of running the world, you know? In like the Roman days, right? There is genuinely a large degree of instability in the kind of primitive factional tribalism that humans defaulted to back when we were, throwing rocks and sticks and so on. There is a kind of peace, a kind of unifying vision in conquest. Not to say the Romans didn't do a bunch of fucked up things, but there are arguments to be made, certainly. But that hasn't been the case for a long time now. And the reason for that is because as societies have grown more complex, we benefit more and more from stability. See, 2,000 years ago, the difference between a stable and unstable region wasn't like that. Well, I shouldn't say it wasn't that great. What I should say is that the productive capacity of a civilization wasn't as affected by the degree of legal stability that they experienced. Or to put it another way, whether you were in Rome or a barbarian, you're making like, I don't know, you're milling grain, you're weaving rugs. You understand what I mean? Like, the basic production of a society was not as determined by whether it was to an extent lawless. As societies got more complex, that is no longer the case. Now, the relationship between stability and productive output is enormous, to the point where a industrious and stable nation like China can produce like not just orders of magnitude isn't even like the right term for it, you know? The difference between what a civilization like China or America or whatever can produce relative to, say, Sudan, even if you normalize for stuff like population, it's monumental. The modern world depends enormously on stability, you know? That's why colonialism used to work differently. It used to be if you wanted to gather the wealth of a nation, it existed in its gold, in natural resources. Gold, silver, maybe cattle, right? There were literal physical things that you could take over. You could conquer a nation, and then you could liquidate the wealth of that nation in the form of its riches, and then you would be wealthier for it, right? That's mercantilism. That's the old method of colonialism. But nowadays, if you invaded Taiwan and in so doing bombed all their factories, what worth are they? Could you make chips out of them? No. Do you have the expertise to produce them? No. You might be decades away from being able to do so if the right people died during the invasion. And what's more, what use are those microchips if you can't trade them? If everyone embargoes your Vietnam occupied, lol, Vosh doesn't realize we're doing that with Venezuela and their oil. He's a silly Billy. I can't tell if you're being sarcastic, but I'm making a point that we're returning to this. You understand? That's the point that I'm making. The point that I'm making is that we are now this way of engaging in colonialism is literally obsolete. The modern way of engaging in colonialism, which is much more productive and much less destructive, is neocolonialism, which is rather than literally conquering a country and liquidating its wealth or whatever, you just you smartly invest and you build up the laws in that nation to favor your regime's crony companies. You use soft power, you develop the country, but in a way that favors your interests, right? That's one of the reasons the developing world has remained the developing world, through very careful, like decades and decades of, I don't know what you could call it, national grooming, selective development. We have incentivized the development of certain industries in those countries, industries that we profit from enormously, like, say, clothing manufacturing in Bangladesh, ensuring that as long as they stay in this relatively niche, relatively unproductive market, they don't develop internally, they always have a market. They can always sell to us. But it also guarantees their country never develops past a point. In essence, we have externalized the poverty. Before, we kept an element of unproductive asset development in the United States. Now we can put it in a different country. We benefit from it. We make a fuck ton of money from it. That's how fast fashion can run at the cycle that it does. They can produce clothing for a fraction of what we can. We do this all over the world. I guess what I'm saying is, like, I have no idea how the global order is going to survive the leadership of a president of the United States who thinks that colonialism works the old way. You get me? How do we survive that? How do we build up from that? In his conversation with the Times, Mr. Trump sounded more emboldened than ever. Yeah, no one's stopping him. He cited the success of a strike on Iran's nuclear program that Chuck Schumer was happy about, by the way. He keeps a model of the B-2 bombers used in the mission on his desk, the speed with which he decapitated the Venezuelan government last weekend, and his designs on Greenland, which is controlled by Denmark, a NATO ally. When asked what was a higher priority, obtaining Greenland or preserving NATO, Mr. Trump declined to answer directly, but acknowledged it may be a choice. He made clear the transatlantic alliance was essentially useless without the United States at its core. That's not true. Even as he characterized the norms of the post-World War II order as unnecessary burdens on a superpower, Mr. Trump was dismissive of the idea that the leader of China, Xi Jinping, or Putin of Russia could use similar logic to the detriment of the United States. On topic after topic, he made clear that in his mind, U.S. power is the determining factor, and that previous presidents have been too cautious to make use of it for political supremacy or national profit. The president's insistence that Greenland must become part of the United States was a prime example of his worldview. It was not enough to exercise the U.S. right under a 1951 treaty to reopen long-closed military bases on the huge landmass, which is a strategically important crossroads for U.S., European, Chinese, and Russian naval operations. Here it is. The entirety of Greenland, everyone who lives there. I love it. It's supposed to be very pretty. Look at those glaciers bobbing around in the water. You think countries will start considering attacks on us if they keep this invasion shit going? I mean, Denmark has said as much, but legitimately, the European Union, NATO except for us, needs to start fortifying Greenland. I'm being serious. Like, they can't... The reason we are at this crossroads right now is because nobody has ever taken seriously putting limits on American power. After Trump tariffed the entire world, they should have tariffed us back and stayed that way. But instead, they have aided and abetted us. Every war, every action, every time we do anything, the cucks over in the European Union, desperate for their delicious yum-yum NATO military dollars, continue to defend us over and over again, Keir Starmer did it with Venezuela, and I guarantee you the next prime minister will as well. I am so sick of it. What's the point of friends if they can't hold you to account, You don't have a right to be smug. Canada at least seems to be taking this somewhat seriously. They need to marshal their military. I noticed this article isn't directly quoting Trump at any point. Well, the New York Times does like to sane wash, but also, he rambles every answer. So it's a conciseness thing, I imagine. Ownership is very important, Mr. Trump said, as he discussed, with a real estate mogul's eye, the landmass of Greenland, 3 times the size of Texas, but with a population of less than 60,000. He seems to dismiss the value of having Greenland under the control of a close NATO ally. When asked why he needed to possess the territory, he said, "Because that's what I feel is psychologically needed for success." I love Nazi esotericism. I think that ownership gives you a thing that you can't do with. You're talking about a lease or a treaty. Ownership gives you things and elements you just can't get from signing a document. It's a like the art of the deal bit. The conversation made clear that in Trump's view, sovereignty and national borders are less important than the singular role the U.S. plays as protector of the West. You know what I'm really tired of, by the way? The left being correct too early every single time, with no exceptions. We are here now because we have never placed limitations on America's war powers. Every time a U.S. president has done some bullshit like this, everyone has clapped along and allowed it. And only after the fact have liberals soured on it. The Vietnam War? Oh, we were right about that, but we were right too early. The Iraq War? Afghanistan? Oh, we were right about that, but too early. The War on Terror? Criticizing Obama for using his presidential power with impunity to exercise his right to drone strike basically every country in the Middle East? Nah. Liberals haven't even caught up to that one being bad yet. That's still only a lefty position. Liberals still think Obama's God, Over and over and over and over again. Nixon and LBJ in Vietnam. Kissinger, man, Kissinger. Jesus Christ, Hillary Clinton was friends with Kissinger. That's insane. Kissinger was a mass murderer. He single-handedly, illegally, he was an operator who illegally directed covert bombing runs. He wasn't just like a diplomat or whatever. He was given extensive power. He colluded with Nixon to extend the Vietnam War past 68. Was it 68? I don't remember the year. And Hillary Clinton was friends with him. He argued that only he, and not 2 predecessors on whom he heaped scorn, Biden and Obama, had proven capable of persuading NATO nations to spend 5% of their GDP on defense. About 1.5% of that is actually for domestic infrastructure, from power grids to cybersecurity, that can support defense. The target does not kick in until 2035, 6 years after Mr. Trump leaves office. Well, we'll see about that. I want them to shape up, he said. I think we'll always get along with Europe, but I want them to shape up. I'm the one that got them to spend more on the, more GDP on NATO. But if you look at NATO, Russia, I can tell you, is not at all concerned with any other country but us. The president added, I've been very loyal to Europe. I've done a good job. If it weren't for me, Russia would have all of Ukraine right now. He seemed unconcerned that the last major nuclear arms control agreement with Russia was set to expire in 4 weeks, leaving the world's 2 largest nuclear powers free to expand their arsenals without limit for the first time in half a century. If it expires, it expires, he said. We'll just do a better agreement, he added, insisting that China, which has the fastest growing arsenal in the world, should be incorporated in any future agreement. You probably want to get a couple of other players involved too, Mr. Trump said. The president seemed equally sanguine about whether his decision to send special operations forces into Caracas to remove Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela would be exploited by China or Russia. In the days since the action in Venezuela, there have been arguments that the U.S. precedent would help justify a Chinese effort to take Taiwan or Russia's attempt to seize Ukraine, which Putin has described as a historical part of the Russian Empire dating back more than a dozen centuries. Asked whether he had created a precedent that he may later regret, Trump argued that his view of the threat posed by Maduro's Venezuela was quite different than Mr. Xi's view of Taiwan. This was a real threat, he said of Venezuela. You didn't have people pouring into China, he argued, repeating his oft-made claim that Mr. Maduro dumped gang members into the U.S. Mr. Trump added, you didn't have drugs pouring into China. You didn't have all the bad things that we've had. You didn't have the jails of Taiwan opened up and the people pouring into China. Or, he said later, criminals and others pouring into Russia. When a reporter noted that Mr. Xi regarded Taiwan as a separatist threat to China, Mr. Trump said, that's up to him what he's going to be doing. But, I've expressed to him that I'd be very unhappy if he did that, and I don't think he'll do that. I hope he doesn't. Then, asked whether Mr. Xi might seize on recent events to attack or choke off Taiwan, he suggested the Chinese leader would not dare take that step while Mr. Trump was in office. He may do it after we have a different president, but I don't think he's going to do it with me as president, he said. On the domestic front, Trump suggested that judges only have power to restrict his domestic policy agenda, from the deployment of the National Guard to the imposition of tariffs, under certain circumstances. But he was already considering workarounds. He raised the possibility that if his tariffs issued under emergency authorities were struck down by the Supreme Court, he could repackage them as licensing fees. And Mr. Trump, who said he was elected to restore law and order, reiterated he was willing to invoke the Insurrection Act and deploy the military inside the U.S. and federalize some National Guard units if he felt it was important to do so. So far, he said, I haven't really felt the need to do it. Yeah, I think I'm right. I really do not think there is any dictator on earth with more unilateral power than him. I really don't think there is. I don't think, because in every other dictatorship, the dictator is at risk of getting replaced by one of his underlings, right? Look at Putin and Prigozhin. Thank you. It's in any, like, if a member of the Kim dynasty acted with this much impunity, acted this recklessly, he would probably be, ousted or killed, disappeared or whatever. It's just America. Only America has so much power accumulated in the Oval Office. So much. You're on top of such a massive mountain of power and authority and influence that you can get away with anything. Anything. The power of dictatorship with the legitimacy of elections. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's pretty bad. There's a very real possibility that we're going to go after Greenland. Very, very, very real. If anything, like, I would not have guessed this before, but I feel like we're edging more towards it happening than it not happening at this point. How is Trump so lucky? Because he's being backed by a party and by donors who recognized that their only shot of winning in the future was under him, because only he has the sauce to make it work. And he is egotistical enough that they're aware of the fact that if they check his behavior, he'll get mad at them and, end their careers. And yes, the Dems are weak and the media is complicit. You get an interview with the president, all you ever do is ask him questions. Not that that's necessarily new with him. They did the exact same shit with Nixon and Kissinger, you know that? Exact same shit. There's a million little anecdotes, a million little interviews where Kissinger, while he was engaged in secret, like, Cambodian bombing, would, flounce it up with interviewers, and he would play up how he's opposed to the Vietnam War, but there's not much he can do about it, and they would just buddy, they'd get along. Yeah, Laos as well. Just disgusting, man. Honestly, all this does tie back to Ford pardoning Nixon. That's a big part of it. Danish forces will shoot first and ask questions later if Greenland's invaded. Yeah, I don't believe them. I'm sorry, I don't believe them. There's been a million red lines drawn on this. I don't believe them. I need to see it happen. Will they not go for Cuba first? Marco Rubio cares about Cuba, not Trump. That's Marco Rubio's thing. The New York Times interview was with Trump. Depends if Miller or Rubio's in charge. Miller, Rubio, and Vance are the three big, worm tongues in Trump's ear. Trump has wanted Greenland for a while. Yeah, but Trump doesn't really do anything, right? Trump does everything. It's only with Trump's approval that any of this can happen.